Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, where we help new and beginning teachers navigate through those crazy first years of teaching so you can maintain your sanity and personal life. Here's your host, Kim Lepre.
Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kim Lepre, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. Today on episode 42, we are talking about how you can tell if your students are learning. But first, I kind of had this idea that I wanted to run by you guys. So I'm thinking of bringing back an old idea of creating a course for new teachers, basically teaching you the stuff that you should have learned when getting your teaching credential. So it would cover the most important parts of teaching and give specific details to fast track a new teacher so that they feel like there's some semblance of order and control for that first year. And obviously, you can't be good at everything at once, so this would help them focus on the biggest bang for their buck in terms of, what they need to put a lot of their energy in that first, second, third year of teaching. And I also plan to include sections for those who come in late in the year or are maybe hired the day before school. So what do you think? As a new teacher, would you sign up for that? How much would it be worth to you? If you wouldn't sign up for it, why not? So what I'm wondering is, if you have a moment this week, please complete the Google form in the link in my show notes, or you can head on over to teachersneedteachers.com/42. And this will help me know if it's worth my time to create it. I've always wanted to. And it'll also let me know what you think I should include. What would you find helpful in a course like this? And it's not going to be some lengthy and boring university type course. It will be very strategic and give you some advice that I know will get you on the road quickly to feeling like you're being successful in your classroom. So if you complete the form and if you also leave your email, there's going to be, a place for that. Then if I do decide to create the course, you'll be invited via email to beta test it and make it better.
I'm Teresa Steger from the Principal PLN podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual hosts. Make sure you check out all the other great podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com. And get ready, because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
So today's episode comes from my own experiences as a new teacher. Some from when I was a new teacher, like brand new teacher teaching band, and then as a brand new English teacher. And one of my biggest frustrations during that time has to do with, are my students learning anything? So just imagine this. So you carefully plan your lessons, either with something you created or preferably something you borrowed from another teacher or from TPT. Now, thankfully, the lesson went as planned. The students seem to be participating during the lesson and group discussion, and they're diligently completing their assignments. And you rightfully pat yourself on the back for a lesson well done. But when you start grading the assignments, it becomes painfully clear that either one, your students weren't paying attention, and or two, they don't understand what you taught. The majority of the answers are incorrect, or they failed to use the skill or concept you just taught them. And you feel deflated. I mean, if they truly understood it and maybe they chose to only complete half of it, you could still tell from what's on their page whether or not they got the concept, right? You don't need a student to do 50 math problems in order to know whether or not they understand how to factor. You can tell within the first handful of problems if they get it. But if even with a full page, your students are still missing the mark, or after teaching modeling for them, having the class participate together, having groups practice together, and then having them work individually, and they still don't seem to get it. It's so frustrating. And you wonder, what went wrong? Now, I can tell you that I've been through this, particularly when I started out teaching, even during my band years. I think it might have actually been worse in my band years because I hadn't developed the ears for hearing everything that was going wrong. I mean, I had spent time at the university listening to university level ensembles. And so I had that in my ear, but not what to expect from middle school beginning band. And then I'd be teaching the kids and we'd be learning music, and I would hear a recording later on, maybe at a festival or a competition, and think, wait a minute, that's my band? What happened? Because that's not what I hear when I'm in front of them. And, the same thing happened in English as well. So I would go over and over a concept, only to have the kids like bomb a quiz or have the majority of my 170 students write incorrect essays. And it was really disheartening. And, in those moments, I really felt like I sucked at teaching. You can't help it. But, going back to when I taught band, year after year, my bands would just be okay. They'd be pretty mediocre. I thought we were amazing until we went to a competition or festival, but the scores and the feedback said otherwise. And a band is only as good as its director, so I knew that it was a direct reflection on me. The thing is, I didn't really do much to improve as a band director. I mean, I hate to admit it, but I never attended a conference, even though they were only half an hour away. I didn't do any research, and I definitely didn't spend much time, aside from school or competitions, working on band stuff. And so at that point, I knew I needed to do something else. But, as an English teacher, I actually really, really wanted my students to improve. I didn't care, honestly, if my students met other people's standards. I just wanted them to improve with reading and writing on their individual level. And I knew that I had to up my game to become a better teacher so that they could achieve that goal, so that they could improve. So as a first-year teacher, one of our inevitable weaknesses is not having a clear picture in our mind of what we can reasonably expect a student to be able to do at that level. I was a decent writer at that point when I started teaching English, so I had fairly high expectations of what a 7th grader should be able to do, and it was reflected on how I graded their assignments. And this is the same way how I was in university ensembles, and so, what sounded good in my ears was different from the reality in front of me. I know that sounds weird because eventually I thought my students sounded great, and then, when I got to the festival, apparently they weren't that great. Anyway, having just come from higher education, as I mentioned, our sense of reality in terms of student ability can be skewed. We're used to writing long essays, reading difficult texts, having in-depth conversations, analyzing and justifying. And then we walk into a 5th grade class and either over or underestimate their abilities, and it happens all the time. So, how can you tell if your students are truly learning and making progress for someone in their particular grade? How can you tell that they're meeting the standard when you're brand new and you've never taught 5th grade before? Or how can you tell if what you're doing is working? So I have 3 things I want to discuss with you today to help you determine if they're actually learning and you're making progress. So first, if you haven't already, you need to be crystal clear on what you want your students to accomplish. Now, I know this may seem obvious, but if you give students a worksheet, what do you want them to accomplish by completing that worksheet? Is it finishing? Is that your goal? Is practicing a skill your goal? Is assessing their current level your goal? So what's the point of them finishing that worksheet? The reason why I bring this up is that in the beginning, we sometimes get shiny object syndrome with our lessons. We may get inspired to do something really fun and cool, or maybe there's a novel that you absolutely love and want your students to read. Maybe you heard about a teacher who did an exploding pumpkin assignment for math, and you're like, I want to do that too, even though that doesn't have anything to do with my curriculum. So while this is all and well, we sometimes lose sight of our goals when we get caught up in that excitement. I did this so much when I taught band. I'm not even going to lie. There were songs that I played when I was in school, middle or high school, and I wanted my band to play them whether or not they were ready. And I found this out because when I had my high school band play a song that I played in high school, I was like, well, you're in high school, you should be able to play it. The song was amazing. We all loved it. And then when we went to a band festival, the judges were like, they're not quite ready for this song. I didn't know that. In my mind, I just wanted to have them learn that song. Or when I was teaching English one year, I read about the Global Happiness Project. And I was like, oh my God, that sounds so cool. And I thought, you know what? I want my students to be, globally aware so that they can be more engaged citizens. The problem was the way I went about it, because I didn't have a goal or a point to us doing the assignments. I just wanted to do something with the Global Happiness Project, even though it didn't fit in with anything in my curriculum. So I just had them do research and do some writing and saying, oh yeah, it's, English language arts. We should do research and writing. But it didn't fit into the bigger picture of what I needed to teach. Another year, oh boy, this is bad. I bought this book, and it was a way of teaching grammar to students in the context of a story. So they would get a little bit of the storyline for each assignment, and there would be problems with grammar and spelling and punctuation. And so eventually they're supposed to get the whole story while correcting this. And I thought it was a brilliant idea personally, and I got really excited about it. The problem was that the exercises ended up taking too much time. It really wasn't helping their writing at all in the way that I'd hoped. And the students ended up not really liking the story. They thought it was lame. So that was kind of a waste of my time and efforts. So in order for you to know if your students are learning, you need to know what are the small and big goals for the unit, for the quarter, the semester, or even the year. This can be difficult your first few years because your small and big goals may just be to survive the whole year or survive a class period. But even with little experience, you need to have a big picture or a bird's eye view so that you know where you're going and everything you do in class aligns with that destination. So even if you're not sure, just pick a goal. If your goal is to have students, write better, well, qualify what better means. And it's really important to do a pre-assessment so that you know what better means. But just pick a large, overarching goal for the year, one aspect in your particular subject area where you want students to improve, and you want everything to align with that goal. To use a real world example, if I want to go on vacation to Europe, I am going to have to save up for that. So my goal is going to be to put aside money every single month so that I can save up for vacation. And when I go to spend something, or if someone invites me out, or, if there's some expense that comes up, I have to think about whether or not it aligns with that goal. All right. So next, you also want a clear idea of what students in a particular grade are expected to know and what proficient in a certain standard or skill looks like. This was my biggest problem when I started out with English, because the first semester, I thought everyone's essays were terrible. Then someone reminded me that they're not necessarily great writers yet. Plus, I had to account for special ed students or English learners. So then second semester, I was like, oh yeah, I need to be easy on them. And everyone got an A. So I still wasn't clear on what 7th grade students should be able to produce. What really made the difference for me was looking at graded essays from another 7th grade teacher and then looking at their feedback. I'd also talked to them about why they graded the essay the way they did. And over time, I had refined my own sense of what good 7th grade writing is. So then I was able to determine sooner if students were struggling. Now, I can tell you that if I were to switch to 10th grade English tomorrow, I would probably think that all of my students' writing was great. But that's because I've been calibrated to 7th grade expectations. So I would then have to do the same thing with looking at, 10th grade papers with other teachers and then talking about, what needs improvement so that I can get a sense of what's expected for that grade. Now, you've probably heard this, but this is one of the reasons why rubrics and having mentor texts or models is so essential. You not only want to know for yourself where you want to get students to, but you also want them to know what to aim for. So when students have a model or a rubric to refer to when completing assignments, they can compare their progress and adjust as necessary. Also, knowing what you can reasonably expect from students will help you know if they're making progress while they're learning the skill, as opposed to when you assess them or grade the assignment later. As you go around looking at their work in class, you can catch them when they're veering off track or praise them when they're totally nailing it. Real-time feedback is one of the most powerful tools you can use to ensure student learning and progress. I remember for the first few years, I would circulate around the room, mainly to keep the peace, make sure they didn't have blank worksheets, but I wasn't really looking at their work. So then I'd be puzzled why, when they had to apply those skills at another time, it was as if I didn't teach them anything. I finally figured out that I wasn't catching their missteps in time. They weren't getting good feedback until they received their graded assignment. So next and finally, and this goes with the previous point, it's helpful to have the students work in groups. That way you can listen in on their conversations. And to me, this is one of the most important things that happens in my classroom. It's seriously so efficient and it's so effective in terms of letting me know if my students are on track. So there have been countless times when I've overheard something that in my head I've thought, oh, no. So then I would just mosey on over to that group and start asking some probing questions without giving them the answer. This would help redirect them, and then I end up with more students practicing the skill correctly. Once students have practiced the skill incorrectly, and they've completed the assignment and turned it in, it becomes an uphill battle to fix those mistakes. You'll have to somehow spiral or review that concept in a way that won't bore the ones that did get it, and then give them another opportunity to practice as well as an assessment. Now, you may very well have to do this anyway, but in the long run, you're going to save yourself time and effort if you catch their mistakes early. So how can you tell your students are learning? So let's review. First, know what you want your students to accomplish, both on a micro and a macro level. What do you want them to learn right now? What do they need to learn by the end of the school year? What do you want them to definitely be able to do before they move on to the next grade level? Then you need to know what you can reasonably expect from students at the grade level you teach so that you can actually tell if they're making progress. Finally, you need to get them engaging in academic conversations while working on the assignment. And this gives you an extra way to informally assess them, which means you can reteach if necessary, or maybe just pull students over for small group instructions, or maybe even move on. So when this happens to you, just remember to regroup, reflect on these 3 aspects of teaching, and then soldier on. So I hope you guys found this information useful. I know that there's going to be a time when you're going to need to come back to this episode so that you can remember what are the 3 aspects of teaching to reflect on, to know if your students are learning. And I invite you to email me and let me know if you have any other questions or if you have specific concerns in your particular situation. And don't forget, I'm thinking of making this beginning teacher course. And so in order for me to know if it'll be worth it, I would really appreciate it if you could complete the Google form that's in the show notes and also at teachersneedteachers.com/42. Thanks for listening in today, you guys, and have a fabulous week.
Thanks for listening to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast. Love this episode? Head over to Apple Podcast or Google Play to subscribe, rate, and leave a review.